man, I was drafted in the 14th round, and I was drafted solely because of my speed. Um, in today's game, where the amount of rounds are cut in half, I'm not 100% sure if I get taken in today's draft. Marc, man, just from your point of view and being the national cross checker, I'd love to just pepper you with some questions about that scouting side of things, man. But like, there are associate scouts, there are area scouts, and then there are like cross checkers. Man, can you kind of run me through that structure of what those different scouting departments are?
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, like you said, the associate scouts are kind of very regionalized. Usually, local guys don't really go out on the road all that much. It's kind of commuters from their house type of deal like that. So, they'll get some names and some ideas of games to go to for the area scouts. The area scouts will have usually, I mean, depending on the part of the country, a few states. In Florida, depending how your team cuts it up, you can have two different guys in Florida. We actually have three different scouts that cover parts of Florida. So it just depends how you cut it up. But the bigger states, you can cut in half. Your Texas, California, stuff like that. So area scouts have a little bigger area, and then you have regional supervisors or cross checkers, which most organizations have three, four of those guys. So it's you can cut it up different. It can be like a southeast, northeast, southwest, and northwest kind of deal. And then above that, there's some assistant scouting directors, some national cross checkers, and then obviously the scouting director is kind of in charge of the whole amateur staff there.
I
So
love that. I love
yeah,
that. That's important to kind of understand, like the scouting hierarchy, if you will.
yeah, for sure.
Joseph, man, in your experience, I mean, you're obviously communicating back and forth with different teams, different scouts at different levels, kind of like Marc was talking about, man. How important is it being an MLB agent to have these relationships with different teams and different area scouts, different levels of scouts, man? And what kind of role does that play in being able to get your guys seen and get your guys drafted?
Yeah, so really, it's understanding the hierarchy and really respecting the area scouts and going to them first. Because one of the things there is that sometimes you go above a scout, an area scout, and they feel a certain way about it, and you never want to have those bad relationships. So I always go to the area scouts first, let them know which guys I have in the area. Once it gets closer to the draft, try to get them into pre-draft workouts and things like that most clubs do. But really understanding that hierarchy, and then once the draft comes, that's when it really changes because there's some teams like the Oakland Athletics, they have their area scouts in the war room, right? And they're all in the same location. But there's other teams now that the area scouts are not at the location. So really understanding that you're probably going to get some calls from some regional cross checkers and things like that before the draft, during the draft, as it goes on, and understanding the differences between different clubs and how they use analytics and more traditional scouting. So it really it differs between each team, but definitely understand the hierarchy. It's very important to respect those area scouts. They work very hard and tracking down players and getting all the reports in and communicate with them first and foremost.
Man, I love that. It's something like that's not necessarily something that I knew or could get in front of with the relationship between having an advisor or having an agent, and then how important that was, what kind of relationships my agent had, with certain teams and stuff. Obviously, as I progressed through my career, I learned how important that stuff was, how important it is to have the right representation, having that connection, knowing that your guy is going to be fighting for you and doing the best like his ability to get your name out and make sure he's doing everything he can. That's awesome. So, Marc, let's say, man, you identify somebody that is on your radar. You're like, hey, this guy, and we'll kind of break down a little bit, how you evaluated me back in the day. And I'd love to get into that and those type of like intangibles and stuff. But man, let's say you identify somebody as being a potential prospect. Maybe he could be a top 10 round pick. Maybe you could see him in a major league uniform one day wearing an A's uniform. What's that process like?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you try and reach out, and like Joe said, the area scouts are kind of the heartbeat of the organization. So those guys usually establish that relationship first. And you want to have a good representative of your organization, right? So hopefully those guys are, communicate well. They have good relationships. Communication's huge, I think, throughout the whole process. It allows everything to flow much easier. And there's, kind of like any line of work, but there's some agents that are easier to communicate with, and there's some that are not as easy to communicate with. So, and there's times, I mean, you get in the draft room, and some of those guys that are harder and more difficult, and if the players are kind of similar, I mean, sometimes you say, hey, let's call this agent because we know we can get something done with him. So,
Mm,
that's yeah, and that's something that a lot of the kids don't realize. And when people ask me an opinion on that, I always try and tell them, like, it's your career. So you have to make sure that what you want to do ultimately is what you do. I mean, yes, you have an agent. Obviously, they're going to give you all the information, but don't let the agent just kind of make the decision for you. And some of the guys don't even relay, you find out later, they don't even relay the information that we're trying to get them. So the kid will say, well, I never knew that you had interest at this place, and and that kind of thing. And that's unfortunate, but we can only kind of do on our end what we know we're doing. And that's why the relationships and the communication become important, because you want to make sure the kid knows exactly what you're trying to relay to them. And it's kind of the same hierarchy that Joe was talking about. I mean, it's not good practice for us to go right to the player themselves if they have a representative.
yeah.
But at the same time, it's sometimes the pieces don't all add up. Like, the area scouts might say, hey, this kid was begging me to sign. He would sign for X amount, and the agent's telling you twice as much, and you kind of get put in a hard spot there. So it's really important for those, the players to really understand who's representing them, and to make sure that, they're conveying exactly what their true feelings are. So.
I love that, man. And Joseph, so like in my experience, I was I was a Northeast grinder that was obviously like a walk on in college, and I kind of made a name for myself with my legs, right? I didn't really showcase much with the bat, but obviously like I could potentially grow into the role later down the line. So I would have technically signed for, I mean, a plane ticket and an opportunity, right? But my advisement,
Right.
my representation at the time, they advised me to say like, hey, if any of these scouts reach out, or if you get any questionnaires in the mail, or if a scout shows up at your stadium or your school, don't tell them what you're hoping to sign for, right? Is that something that you advise to your guys to kind
Mm-hmm.
of like say, hey, keep it tight lipped, keep it close to the vest, because you don't want to show your cards too early and maybe get lowballed if maybe when the draft comes around. Is that something you advise your guys on?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because you don't know. There's been times that I've had players drafted that I don't hear from a team for 2 months, and then right before the draft or the day two of the draft comes and they're calling. And I actually had that situation this year. One of my guys that was drafted, the area scout didn't even know that the scouting director had called me already, and he was ecstatic because he wasn't in the war room. It was one of those teams, and he was like, they didn't even tell me anything, and that was probably the least expected team for that kid to go with. So they'll do things like that, but I always tell players, you don't know, the value that they have, and it can vary. Some teams, they have all the analytics, they have different models, and they could have a kid for 600,000, and every other team has them for 150.
Mm,
And that stuff sometimes happens. So I always tell them, yeah, definitely tight-lipped until you get closer and kind of get a feel for what the teams are saying and what they're doing. But like Mark said, that's one of the things I'm always honest with my players, and I always relay the information that I'm getting. And there's a lot of young players, especially in high school, that are super projectable. I know 10, 15, 20 different kids that in high school got offered 600, 750, and some of them didn't even know those were the offers on the table. And 3 or 4 years later, they're out of baseball. They're not able to. They're trying to go play indie ball now, and it's just really sad to see because for me, it's really important. Every family is different. Every person's needs are different, so I think you have to evaluate that individually and not just, hey, we got to meet this quota, so we're making this much profit every year. And I think that's wrong. And unfortunately, that's what happens a lot. And a lot of players are left out of baseball after that. And baseball doesn't stop for anyone. Oh, we can't sign Ian. Oh, we're going to cry about it. And it's not, that's not how it works. They'll find the next guy. Who's the next guy we have in line? Let's go.
Man,
So
that's next guy up mentality almost, huh?
yeah,
That makes
absolutely.
sense. So Mark, we talked about obviously like you have to be talented in order to get to the major leagues. You have to be talented in order to, get to minor league baseball, get drafted, or you have to pair that talent with some sort of future promise, some sort of projectability, man. Um, has there been an instance where you've maybe identified this kid or this young man as being projectable in getting to the next level? You might want to take a chance on this kid and put some sort of investment into him in the top couple rounds, take a chance on him, and then you get to know him, or you sit down and you meet him and his family, whether it's like over winter break. That's something that I've experienced, right? Where it's like after fall ball, some scouts will show up and run you through some, personality assessments, get to know you a little bit better as you're progressing into spring ball. Has there been an instance where you've been like, I'm out on this guy after meeting him, after spending a little bit more time on him? Is that something that can maybe like disqualify somebody?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's an important piece of the puzzle. You played. We've all been around the game for a long time. At some point, a majority of the guys have similar talent. I mean, there's definitely your outliers that are much more naturally gifted, and then there's some guys at the bottom that are just kind of scrapping for every opportunity. But there's a big group of guys that kind of fit in that same bucket per se. So that part of it's huge. And we do, like you said, kind of watch everything summer, fall, and then in the winter time, usually for the college guys, when either at the end of the fall semester or when they first get back. Every college is a little different how they prefer the timing for you to come in and meet with players, but you definitely try and get a good feel for the guys going into that spring season who are kind of high on your follow list. So I definitely try and go meet with some of the guys who are that first round, second round kind of profile for us at that time. But our area scouts will go deeper for sure. I mean, hopefully they're doing the top 4 or 5 rounds. And some of these colleges could have 8 or 10 prospects on the team. So you're also, while you're there, you're just meeting with some of the lower guys as well
Yeah.
and getting to know them. But it's huge. And I mean, to answer your question, yeah, for sure. I mean, you sit down with some of these guys, and some of them are, it's a little uncomfortable. They don't communicate well, or personality may have a red flag. Or, we talked a little bit about yesterday through email, I think, with the MLB combine now that they've had the last few years. And for me, the most valuable piece of that 5 days that we're there are the interviews. And you get to sit down and talk with, basically, you try and pick out however many guys you want to meet with, and they give you, it's like 25 minutes. It's about every half hour they rotate through, and then you can request an hour long meeting with, I think, maybe a couple guys. But it's valuable because at that point you kind of know where they all fit talent wise, on your pref list. So now you're trying to really differentiate some stuff here and there. I mean, me being a pitcher and talking to the pitchers, you can kind of see what they do in between starts. I mean, how much work do they do? Are they taking care of their body? You can ask them how they grip the ball on different pitches. So we had one high school guy this year who we kind of had a lot of reports on that his breaking ball wasn't great, threw really hard. And then you sit and meet with him and you ask him to show you the grip on his curveball and slider, and it's like a totally wacky grip. I'm like, I wonder why this guy can't spin the baseball. So, that kind of stuff is definitely valuable. But we had 2 guys this year that left. I think we did about 35, 40 of those meetings at the combine. And 2 of them really stood out to where you had some concerns about, is this guy really ready to go out, play pro ball, live on his own, that whole deal. It's difficult, especially, high school guys, you're 18, 17, 18, 19. I mean, it's a big difference. The college guys have been on their own a little bit more, but I mean, one of those 2 guys was a college guy this year. So it just, it was, for that reason. And then you get into, and you hit on it a little bit when we were talking about yourself as a player. I mean, you talked about how getting in with the Mariners and really learning your swing and trying to tap into a little more power and stuff like that. That open-mindedness is huge. And, you'll sit in there with an interview with some of these guys, even college guys, and they're so narrow focused, and this is the way I do it, I'm not changing, like that type of deal. And you got to kind of think to yourself a little bit, hey, is this somebody I want to turn over to player development? Are they going to just be battling with this guy every single day? Because that's going to get old, and then the dude's not going to perform the way he should. So it's definitely a huge thing. You got to kind of make that decision. If the dude is really talented, like where do you take that risk of, where does he fit in? Or some teams, you talk to a lot of guys, they just would rather move on and just take somebody else that they feel like is going to learn more effectively and be a good teammate, blend in the clubhouse, all that stuff. So it's definitely a huge piece for sure.
Man, I love that. So Joey, let's say, man, obviously, I didn't know you when I was going through the draft process and through this whole, talking to scouts and fielding interest and trying to play the outside game as opposed to, playing my best product on the field. I feel as though I have an insane amount of trust in you and what you're about and how you're guiding your athletes. So if I came to you, if I'm going through the draft process right now, and I'm supposed to be meeting with Marc, or I'm supposed to be meeting with, the Braves national cross checker, and it's going to be a big meeting, or I'm going to be, meeting with, the area scouts, whatever that is. How are you going to tell me to go about these conversations? Am I going to be addressing Marc like yes sir, no sir? Are you going to tell me to be relaxed, easy? Like, how do you tell your guys to kind of like approach these meetings and these conversations?
Really tell them to be themselves, and highlight their strengths, but also talk about some weaknesses that they may have. It doesn't have to be something major. Maybe it's on certain adjustments they need to make, or just show that they're willing to learn, that they're coachable, and that they love the game. For me, that's a huge thing. I'm always watching players when I see them. I see them in Jupiter, or I see them at a showcase. Like, who's the guy that's like smiling, excited, is out there just like enjoying the day? You know what I mean? Those are the guys that I really look for, that really
Right.
want to be on the field, not the guy that he throws his inning, and then his mom's holding his bag and his Gatorade and waiting for him at the gate. He just leaves in the middle of the game. Like that really goes far for me, because I look for players that are going to develop over time, and that's what makes me more competitive, is to find some of those players that develop. And I've had players for 4 or 5 years in high school, and then they're drafted their junior year in college, and they've developed, and we have a really long relationship. But really, it's those guys that love the game, man. You got to love it, because they're very, very long days, as you know, Ian.
Oh
So
yeah,
if you don't like it, it's gonna be tough, man. You can't just come home and see your girlfriend, or I want to go hang out with my
absolutely.
friends at home. It's a grind, man. So I think just showing that you love the game, and just being yourself, but being respectful at the same time.
I
So
love that, man. So
One of the
obviously,
things you
oh
hit
my
on
bad.
too,
Go ahead.
Joe, I think it's super important. We kind of talked about, but we had a guy in one of the interviews this year who said he doesn't need to work on anything. And you kind of look at him and you're like, really? And it was a higher profile kid for sure. But we got guys that sit in our room that played in the big leagues for 10, 12 years, and they're like, really? There's nothing you need to work on? And he like doubled down on it. He was like, yeah, like I do everything, that's why I'm sitting here type of deal. And you just start to think like, like you said, just being honest, being you always got to work on something, no matter how good you are. I mean, the best guys hit 300 now, or 320. So there's always something that we need to be working on. So that's kind of a little bit of a red flag for sure.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely, man. So we have obviously being able to stand out, enjoying the game, having a smile on your face, man, running with some pep in your step, running out to your position, dapping your teammates up, having your teammates back, all that stuff like you can control. You don't necessarily have to have the talent in order to enjoy what you're doing and be able to play a game that is kind of like magnetic, right? You Marc, you can be in the stands and be like that guy enjoys playing baseball,
For
or
sure.
it's a job already to this kid in college or in high school. Man, what are the other type of like intangible things that might stand out to you? Let's say if you're going from my point of view, Northeast Conference, right? So we had Pat Light at Monmouth, who's throwing fucking 100 miles an hour in college in the Northeast. That's unheard of.
Right.
Sophomore year, he throws like a no hitter against Wagner College against us, and it's like, okay, I'm trying to make sure I do everything right because I know scouts are there to see this guy. How can I stand out? What are the types of things that intangible wise, right? You don't necessarily need to have talent, but like, what are the sort of things that stand out to you when you're going to see somebody or go to see somebody else, where it's like, okay, he's got my attention.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you can try and get there as early as you can. Like when I started scouting, I remember our scouting director saying, see the guys off the bus. That was always his deal. So, try and get there as early as you can and just see what you can see. I mean, you can always learn something, but I think the way that person interacts with their teammates a little bit, definitely with coaches, we just kind of talked about if they're receptive to coaching and stuff like that, how they react if they're asked to do something different. But yeah, just are they getting all their stuff in? Like if it's an infielder for me, are they taking ground balls during BP or do they just hit the round of BP and then they disappear for 2 or 3 rounds? And the same thing with the outfielders. And that was something, I'm reading back through the report that I wrote on you during BP. You were out there running balls down, the whole time. So that's something. And the thing that a lot of kids and players don't understand is for myself, especially the area scouts gets to see guys more often, but I probably only get one game on a position player or a pitcher. And if it's terrible, I'll try and get back for sure. But I mean, I'm covering from Maine down to Puerto Rico, basically. So there's only a certain amount of days. So I may go to a game to watch Ian Miller play, and he doesn't get a fly ball the entire game. So that stuff that you did during BP at least gives me a little bit of an idea of, how he gets breaks on the ball or can he run them down, stuff like that. And that goes for infield, outfield with the throwing stuff. Running down the line. If you hit a routine ground ball, that may be the only time I get to see you run the whole time. And if you just run a 5-0 down the line, I have no idea. I can ask the area scout and I see his reports, but it's always more helpful to see it, obviously, with your own eyes in person. So just all that little stuff, I think. And like you said, it's almost like an interview, right? So we're going in there trying to check off as many boxes as we can. And the more information that I have out of that day when I leave the field, the easier it is to write my report and fill in all those boxes. And I always explain it to people when they ask me, well, like, what do you do? What's your job? And I write the report, but I see it as I'm trying to paint a picture for the front office who's probably not going to see 95% of the guys that I write reports on. I mean, they'll go out and see maybe the first round guys or whatever. So I'm trying to paint a picture for them through my words about what I saw, what I think this player can become. So the more information I have to go on, the easier it is for me. If I don't have a lot of information, if you didn't do much, if you just went and took 15 swings in BP and then sat on the bench or went to right field and hung out for 2 or 3 groups, then, it's more difficult for me to try and evaluate the whole prospect with all the tools. So
Absolutely.
that's what I would say. Just basically, you never know who's watching. Just give it a full effort with whatever you're doing that day. I mean, you're out there for 5 hours or whatever it is, and then you can rest and do whatever else you want the rest of the time. So that's what my answer would be for that.
Man, I love it. It makes a ton of sense. Makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah.
So you actually had shared the scouting report that you had on me back in the day, right? I alluded to it a little bit now.
Yeah.
Man, you weren't just talking about, what I was able to do with the bat, like what my ABs were, exactly what you were talking about. You had me going down the line with a banana turn, right? So I had a couple base hits. It was like a St. John's versus Wagner. It was a midweek
Yeah.
game. You were there. It was like a football score, man. I think it was like 20-18 or something like
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
so you had my times on a couple base hits running around first base. So it's not like, if I had a 4.8 or a 5.2 going around first base with a banana turn, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
that's what I got today. How important is it with the all-encompassing like baseball development process, man? You like when you're evaluating somebody, I saw in the report that you had on me, man, you had comments about my forearms, you had comments about my waist, you had comments about
Yeah.
how I looked in a baseball uniform and how I
Yeah.
could project down the line, right? There was a
Right.
comparison. I love Brett Gardner. He was a walk-on
Yeah.
at College of Charleston, man, and it
Yeah.
fired me up
Exactly.
when I saw
Small
the
speed guy.
comparison. It fired me up, man. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on like what are you evaluating these guys on? Just obviously, like I'm sure that could be a loaded question, and you could go on for 30 minutes there.
Yeah,
But
I mean, yeah, there's a lot to it for sure, but yeah, like you said, I mean, just trying to be as in depth as possible. Basically, I mean, that's my job, just to to give our office a clearer picture. I mean, now, even since you played, I think it was what, 2013, 14
Yep.
when you got drafted. So,
13.
I
Yep.
mean, we're 10, 11 years past that now. I mean, there's so much more video and analytics and kind of what you alluded to before. So we do have a lot more information now than we did 10, 11, 12 years ago for sure. But I still do the job the same way. So, I mean, just go out and evaluate the guy. I mean, just try and see, how athletic they are, how much time they've spent in the weight room too. That's obviously important because it's a long season. As you know, you get in the minor leagues and you're playing 140 games. Hopefully, you get to the big leagues and it's more than that. I mean, you have to be somewhat physical for your body to hold up and endure that long season. So yeah, just trying to get a picture, trying to put all the pieces together, everything. Like you said, I mean that game. I think you had like 7 at bats that day. I mean that's probably the most
Yeah.
at bats I've gotten on anybody in my scouting history. But
4 for 7.
one day, to go. So, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of the opposite of what we were talking about, where there's not a ton of information to write a report. But that day was awesome from a scouting perspective because you got BP, you were running down fly balls, and then you get 7 at bats. I think you were 4 for 5 with a couple walks and some stolen bases. So kind of got everything that day. But yeah, just trying to pay attention and complete that whole report as accurate as possible.
Man, I love that, Joseph. So if you have got you had a bunch of guys drafted this year. So let's say if you have guys that are hoping to get drafted and you're advising them, man, how are you telling them to prepare like outside of the field? So obviously, like you have to handle your business on the field in order to get to the next level. But how are you prepping your guys? Being that support system behind the scenes. What are you telling them to do as they prepare as they're going into the fall or going into the spring?
Really to establish routines. I think that's one of the most important things, and that's why the best big leaguers, the Hall of Famers, all those guys, they had a routine. Like some of the guys ate chicken every day, like for lunch. It's crazy, but those routine oriented people are the ones that are very successful in life, especially in baseball. So I try to tell guys like, okay, what is it that you do every day? Okay, try to have a plan of what you're going to do. You have class at this time, you have practice at this time. You want to get extra work in after practice. Like, what are you going to do? So really, just focusing on routines, because once you get into pro ball, you have to have some type of routine. If you don't, if you're just strolling into the park and you're just like, oh, it's another day of work. You're going to have a short career. And a lot of people will tell you that because these players they're different now. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the best players, they're on another level with their routines. And I have Nick LaRusso with the Mets, and he was telling me a story about Matt Shaw, and like Matt Shaw had that since like he was younger, I guess since high school. Like he had like this whole like routine, and he said it was just crazy for him to see that. And when Nick got to Maryland, he transferred in, and obviously he goes, Shaw goes in the first round, and there's a lot leading up to that. There's a lot of routine, a lot of hard work, a lot of different things. But really preparing yourself, mentally too, not being afraid of battling. You got to be able to battle through things, injuries.
Yeah.
It's really tough, man. There's a lot of adversity in baseball, and only 9 guys can play at a time. So
No kidding. No kidding. Man, that's kind of like so this is the Nine Hole podcast obviously where I try to give info and guidance to the next generation of baseball players. I take it a step further with the Nine Hole Athlete Development Program where I spend time with players that want more and I kind of give them information and guidance and one-on-one like mentorship around the entire baseball development process, man. So like you just alluded to, being able to deal with failure, being able to overcome injuries mentally as well as physically, being able to stay even keel, not get too high, not get too low, man. It's all part of like that baseball development process. And obviously, like you are born with the, natural God given abilities and talents and and genetics and stuff. Like obviously you can't necessarily impact that too much. You can put the work in and stuff, but being able to develop mentally, be mentally strong, all that stuff is important in the all-encompassing baseball development process. I got a couple questions here from some players that I work with behind the scenes. Man, so there is a kid that is going to be 24 years old as a senior in college, Marc. So we had talked about it a little bit off the air. Joey, dude, you had a clip that went viral that we were talking about. Baseball's changing. Baseball's changing. Age matters. Let's say if this is a player in like the SEC or ACC, like a big time conference, man, will you cross somebody out because they are significantly older than everybody else? How does that work?
I don't think you can ever cross anybody out totally. I mean, they can still do some things. And Joey had the D'Onofrio kid at UNC this year who was kind of in that same area, but he had tools. I mean, if you have tools, then there's going to be a chance for you as long as you perform to a certain degree. So, in his case, he went into a bigger school. I mean, the dude probably plays center field on any team except for the team he was on this year because the Honeycutt kid was pretty gifted
Oh,
defensively. So, that dude, I mean, it's fun to just watch him play defense. But no, I mean, D'Onofrio, you gotta, or anybody like that at that age, you just have to see what they bring to the table. Now, obviously, once they sign, you hope that they're going to move at a little bit more of an accelerated pace and then catch up to, where they're more age appropriate with the level. So, but a kid like that, I mean, you're drafting him because you think he has the ability to do that. I mean, he can hit a little bit, he can run, play defense. There's a little bit of power in there. So I don't think as a scout you can ever just rule somebody out completely. You got to watch a little bit, see how they play the game, and then ultimately, I mean, that decision is going to come down above me. I mean, that's going to be a general manager, scouting director decision. How much are they willing to take on? That advanced age and kind of where they're going to start out in their development process. I mean, some organization may say, hey, we need an infielder at double A right now. This guy maybe could step in, get his feet wet for a week or two in A ball and then kind of push him if you think he's ready and he can handle it. So that's where each organization, and their philosophy could be a little bit different as well. So yeah, but I think you still got to evaluate the player, see what he brings to the table, and go from there.
I
Yeah.
love it.
And I agree. I agree with Mark. And obviously, a lot of this is COVID. A lot of players that lost years and things like that. And actually had actually had I didn't tell Mark this. I had another 24-year-old that was drafted by the A's, Ryan Magic, Canadian, big lefty. But same thing. He had like the COVID years. He was always a two-way guy. He was at Florida Southern. Like nobody really saw him or thought much of him there. He grad transferred this fall, this spring to Mizzou. And all of a sudden he starts hitting in 94, 95, 96, shuts down Arkansas, shuts down Florida. They sweep Florida for the first time ever. And it's just one of those things that these are outlier guys. This is not going to be a common thing where 24-year-olds have this ability. But I think that in the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12, the thing that helps those guys is the amount of data and information, the Hawkeye, TrackMan. They just have so much more information on these guys. And when they're playing at a really high level and they have all this information, I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, the Hawkeye tells them how many steps it takes to get to first base, on a base hit, or it's just insane the information that they have. So I think that definitely helps them in those big conferences. But you can't rule them out right now just because of all the stuff that happened with COVID and schools getting shut down, colleges losing their programs, COVID years, a lot of different things that went on. But it's really cool to see, that there's still scouts that respect these guys' abilities. There's some teams that will completely rule them out. But I think a lot of the teams that are more traditional scouting, they'll still do their reports. They'll still do what they need to do, and have a lot of respect for those teams. So.
I love that, man. I love that. We got somebody in the chat, Kendall Wade. He said, I don't know if it's Parker College, but he says Bruton Parker College. He runs a 6.260. Remember the name. So there you go, Mark. They're trying to throw some names
There you
your
go.
way. I also have another question. So somebody had messaged me. Obviously, I had put up all over social media that I was going to have you guys on, and so a plethora of questions are coming my way. I have a guy that is at a smaller NAIA school, right? So we always hear if you're good enough, they'll find you. Um, he says, I want to ask how I can get my name out there, more specific, more especially being at a smaller NAIA school. How am I able to get my name out there to scouts? What would you say to that? Is there any advice that you could maybe throw his way?
Yeah, I mean, the best way is just play hard, put up numbers, all that stuff, and somebody will definitely pass along the name. I mean, the job of the area scouts is to try and have good relationships with coaches at every level. So, I know social media is kind of taken on another level of stuff, and guys will put stuff out there, and we have interns in our office that are constantly kind of looking through that stuff just to see if anything pops up that we may not have and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, it's always kind of about putting up numbers, playing hard, and just getting an opportunity for somebody to come watch you, even if it's just one team. Get a chance to get somewhere to play.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
makes sense.
I would piggyback off that, and I would say good summer leagues, I think help guys like that. The Northwoods is a great league, NECBO. The Cape Cod, obviously, it's very tough. It's prestigious, but I think Cape Cod had 197 alumni that were drafted this year. So that's like it was like 33% of the draft. And I think 4-year schools was 81% of the draft. So there wasn't a lot of high school kids
That's
select.
wild.
So, but I would say good summer
Yeah.
leagues. Cool. So
Yeah, and
Okay.
that is a good point too, because you get all the data and stuff from the summer league. So that's not even just NAIA. Some of the smaller, junior college or Division II, Division III guys. If you can go to a summer league there and perform well, that'll say a lot when you start talking about this, models and analytics side of things. So.
I love it, man. There's so much that goes into it. I'm always like, what if I hit 400 and stole 70 bags at a D3 school as opposed to hitting, 325 with 45 bags or whatever it was and like two
Yeah,
extra base hits at D1. I'm not sure, what translates, but obviously, like if you play hard and you're able to
yeah.
play the game the right way, man, everything kind of takes care of itself,
Yeah.
right? I guess that's
I mean, it definitely. I mean, Joe just threw some of the numbers out there. So, I mean, it is definitely more difficult at some of those smaller schools because now, like we talked about, it's a lot different. It's not like we can walk in a room and say, "Hey, I want this guy in the 30th round." There's only 20 rounds now.
yeah,
So it has kind of taken away a little bit of those, gut feel scout type of guys, unfortunately. Pretty much all 20 picks, or if you have an extra one or two or whatever, I mean, they're all getting run through that model. And in an ideal world, they match up and it's somebody that the scout likes and it comes out positive in the model, and that's the best case scenario. But usually it doesn't work that way, so then you're kind of trying to see where the pieces fit. But all that, the model analytics stuff, obviously, if you're in one of those bigger conferences as a position player, you're just seeing better pitching on a daily
yeah,
basis. So that's the biggest thing that becomes difficult when you really try and sell a smaller school guy and they look up some of the data. If whatever they have, it may not be much, but they may be facing an average fastball of 86 or 87 or 85, whereas the guys in these bigger conferences are seeing 90, 94,
yeah.
on a pretty daily basis. So it's just hard sometimes because, I mean, obviously it's easier to project a guy hitting if they're seeing the same kind of stuff they're going to be seeing, in the minor leagues. Then you just don't know how somebody's going to react if they haven't seen that type of stuff. So, and again, that comes back to some of the summer league stuff that Joe talked about. If they go to one of these Northwoods or a better summer league, and you have data that they faced some velo and some stuff, then that'll help you sell it a little bit easier on some of those smaller school guys for sure.
I love that. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Okay, so we got Kendall Wade in the chat. He kind of clarified a little bit. So Bruton Parker College.
Okay,
Yes. Okay, Bruton Parker College. Mr. Wade runs a 6.260. He says,
there you
look
go.
out for him. Keep your eyes peeled moving forward. I appreciate you being here, Kendall. Thank you for the comment, brother. Thank you, for your questions and everything. I got another question about playing multiple positions, being versatile at multiple spots. Um, for me, I was a one-trick pony. I obviously profiled the best in center field. Being an outfielder, you can play all three spots. It's really not that difficult. I feel as though left field is the hardest because of the reads off of a righty bat. If they're yanking something down the line, it's tough. Obviously, right field, got to be able to throw. You got to be able to do a whole lot of things. Man, how do you value, Mark, guys that can play multiple positions? Let's say if I have if I'm a second baseman at a a mid tier D1, and I'm getting in the lineup, I have a decent bat. But I'm well versed in the outfield. I can play left, I can play right, I can play center. I can also pick it a little bit in the infield, play second base, maybe some third base in an emergency. Do you find value in those type of dudes, or would you rather see guys be able to specialize in one spot, focus solely there? Man, how do you value that when you're like recruiting or
Yeah.
evaluating scouting these guys?
Yeah, I think it's extremely valuable if you can play more than one spot. I mean, you have your outliers, and it's usually first base, catcher, that type of deal. Um, they're kind of locked into that one spot, maybe. But yeah, overall, whenever somebody asks me that question, I always just say, be as versatile as you can, be athletic, spend time, if it's anywhere around the infield, spend time taking ground balls at all three spots if you need to. If you feel like you can play outfield, spend time taking some fly balls, because you never know. And it's even when I'm talking to high school kids. I mean, you never know as you move up from JV to varsity, there may be somebody playing shortstop, and if you just say you're a shortstop and you're not willing to go anywhere else, well, then you're going to sit on the bench. Like, you'd rather do that instead of play second or third. So, and it's only going to become more difficult the higher you move up. So, you go to college, there's going to be probably 5 shortstops or something that they recruited. So, to have that ability to move around, and then obviously for us, I mean, even in the draft this year, it's a great example. I mean, you don't often see second basemen go as high as a couple of those guys in this year's draft. So then you get into that conversation of like, well, can he only play second base, or is
Mm,
there a possibility he could play somewhere else? Or why is he playing second base in college and he's not playing shortstop or center field or whatever? So yeah, I mean, I think to be able to do it, and again, you have to, like you said, to play outfield, you got to be able to throw to a certain degree, and then play left side of the infield. Usually, those guys have a little stronger arms than your second baseman. So, but a lot of times you prefer middle of the diamond guys because they can usually move off if they have to. You're not usually going to move a third baseman or a first baseman into shortstop or center field. So those guys just give you a little more flexibility as you talk about projection and them getting stronger physically, and maybe when they do, they lose a step of running, but they can move from the middle of the field to the corners relatively easy, more often than not. So yeah, you definitely, versatility is great. I mean, just once you get to the big leagues, like we talked about, that manager can only write 9 names on that lineup card every night. So the more positions that you can play, the better chance you have to get in the lineup. I mean, that's basically the fact of the matter. So yeah,
I
I
love it.
wouldn't I wouldn't suggest anybody to just entrench themselves in one spot. Basically, just do as much as you can.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. There was Seaver King was that this year for
Number
Wake
10.
Forest. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
Mark took one of his teammates, so
Yeah, yeah,
not
it's not
bad.
much.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah, which is a great. I mean, even Seaver, like dating back, so that's a great like scouting case study. Basically, I mean, the dude was basically unknown in high school. He lived in Athens, Georgia. Didn't get recruited by any big D1 schools. He goes to Wingate, plays there, wins a national championship. But even there, he moved around. He played a little bit of second, a little bit of third. And then we actually took a picture off of his team his sophomore year, a kid named Avant. So I saw him play, and he did play shortstop his sophomore year there. He decides to leave, goes and makes Team USA, walks into Wake Forest, and he'll tell you. I mean, he said, I wanted to play short, but I knew I wasn't going to play short here because Marek Houston's pretty good. I mean, he's going to be a pretty high pick next year. But I figured I would just come and, I'm athletic. I could play second or third. And they actually put him in center field early this spring, and
Yeah,
he was great. he was great out there. He's got instincts, he's got speed, he's got plenty of arms. So, I mean, a guy like that, you already know he can play probably five positions for sure. I mean, he could probably play all three outfields. He could probably play six positions, as soon as you sign him. So
Yeah.
that's a great story. Good
Yeah,
name.
no, he was awesome. I found him his summer in the Valley League, and I reached
Okay.
out to him, and he didn't. He like him and his dad didn't even know what like an advisor was or anything.
Really? Yeah.
And I'm
Really?
like, this kid is going
Crazy.
to be like a top 3 round pick, and they were like, really, and I was like, he definitely is. And
Yeah.
then obviously he blew up. I see him in the Valley playing shortstop. I'm like, who the hell is this kid? He was
Right.
all star that year, and
Yeah.
obviously he blew up very fast. But he's a kid that I would watch, and he loved to be out there. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah.
that's a kid that loves the game, and like he's gonna wake up like ready to take swings and be out there and take fly balls and do whatever. And that's
Yeah.
just a guy that loves baseball, man. I'm really happy for that kid, man. He's a great
Yeah.
kid.
For sure. For
Fires
sure.
me up. Joseph, when does that start with the advisors and the agents, or however you want to, categorize it? I know until you are a professional, it's an advisor. When does that start where you start getting interest in a guy? Like, are you going to start approaching somebody maybe their freshman year of college? Let's say if they're a college guy, it's like, okay, that's a guy I need to get in there early. Do they reach out to you, man? Like, what is that process kind of like for the guys that want to be in that position but don't necessarily know how to go about it?
Yeah, guys do reach out. Really, I try to get guys as early as like ninth or 10th grade,
Okay.
and before everybody else shows up, and try to build a relationship with them. If I can see like there's some outlier tools, and the kid has some projectability and a big body, that's something that I'll do really early. I have a kid now that I had him since 8th grade. He's from Southern California. He'll be going to Louisiana Monroe,
Mm.
a junior there, and he's gotten so much stronger. And we've had like six years now of relationship together, and just waiting. Now it's his draft year coming up, but he did some things this year in JUCO out there in California, and it should be really interesting for him. But yeah, as early as I see it, man. I mean, kid might be 13, and you see him, and he's big and physical with athleticism. Like
You
I'll go
know,
myself and say hello and start to talk to him. So.
yeah, no, that makes sense, man. Okay, so you guys had answered literally every question I had. Mark, I got a couple more for you
Yeah.
before we get out of here. I am so grateful for your guys' time. Before I pepper you with these last couple questions, man, I just want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's stream, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, Cleveland Student Visionaries of the Year, a philanthropic leadership development program for top tier leaders of student athletes out this way. Highly motivated leaders, man, they learn professional skills such as entrepreneurship, marketing, project management, all while trying to do good and raise as much money as possible for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. They got a 7-week challenge to raise funds for the fight against blood cancer. So this past year, they raised over $1 million, man. So 37 teams from local high schools in Northeast Ohio raised $1,053,000 to help find a cure for blood cancer. Just wanted to give them a quick shout out. Appreciate everybody that has anything to do with the LLS. And again, appreciate your guys' time. So, Mark, man, going back these last couple questions to end on a little bit of a hot take for scouting. So let's say outfield wise, I know that speed was my best tool. When you are evaluating a outfielder, what is like what is the not calling card, but what is the make or break thing when you're looking at an outfielder where you're like yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're talking center fielder. It's definitely defense, speed. You hope that they can provide something with the bat, obviously, for sure. And then the corner guys are usually more of your bangers, arm strength. You're hoping to get some power out of those guys. I think the game is definitely hinged on athleticism. I mean, you're going to have your outliers again where it's a bigger dude that maybe doesn't have as much foot speed or range out there, but you try and keep those to a minimum if you can, just to help out the pitchers a little bit and play some defense out there. So yeah, I mean the speed and range, obviously arm strength is great. I mean, there's some guys that don't throw as well, and they probably have another tool that makes up for that. So just trying to balance out the whole player basically. But
Okay. What about infielders? What's something what you're seeing an infielder, whether it's on the left side of the infielder, right side of the whatever it is, where
yeah,
you're like, okay, this guy could be a dude, right? Just right off the bat, you see him and you're evaluating
yeah.
him, and you're like,
I think
yes,
what infielders usually know fairly quickly. I mean, the guys who are really good, they just make it look really easy. It's just smooth feet, the hands work. They get to balls easy. They show some range. I mean, that's obviously your shortstops are preferred with that. The third baseman are usually going to have more arm strength. They're probably not going to have as much foot speed, or else they would be playing shortstop. So, most of those guys can really throw. And then your second baseman are like we talked about before. It's a lot of former shortstops that maybe had a little bit less arm or a little less range than a guy who's playing shortstop. But I think those infielders, again, you're going to have a couple guys here and there that just bang in the big leagues that may play second or third and get away with that. But for the most part, when you draft guys, and obviously the higher you are in the draft, the more you want more tools,
yeah,
basically. So, but yeah, those guys usually, I mean, you can go out and just when they start taking ground balls, you're like, all right, this guy, he can play defense. He's got arm strength, stuff like that. It's pretty easy to
yeah,
him.
you see it. I'm sure you
Yeah,
see it right off the bat. Go ahead,
just
Joey. Sorry.
just to piggyback off, I know Mark. I know we've known each other for some years, and he's definitely a true defense guy. They have to have real defense. He's not going to take like a fringy. He's not going to take interest in that, because he wants guys that play defense. We had Caesar Franco sign with the A's after the draft, and he saw him a lot at Chipola. And Caesar is a tremendous defender. He was one of those kids that he had a lot of hamstring stuff this year during the season, and then he went to the Northwoods right before the draft. Did very well. But that's something that I've noticed about Mark and the A's in general. Like they don't really take like a fringy defensive guy. Like they have to be able to play defense. They
Gotcha.
got to rake, but they got to play. They got to play solid
Might
defense.
be a little bit from my pitching days as a player. You want to feel comfortable. And I was more of a sinker slider contact guy, so I needed defense behind me. But there's certainly obviously there's some exceptions to every rule. If you think a guy's going to be a 3 or 4 hitter in the lineup for a long time, then yeah, you can be a little bit more lenient with some of the defense. But I just think, like we talked about, I think a lot of those guys that play on TV, when you watch them, they're athletic and they're physical and they take pride in playing defense. So,
Yep.
a lot of guys can just go hit and hit and hit and spend hours in the cage, but those separator dudes are the guys that can do something on the other side of the ball too.
Oh yeah, that fires me up right there. And then last one, obviously, that I got for you. What about pitchers? So you're a pitcher yourself, right? You said,
Yep.
man, what is something that you are kind of looking at a pitcher like? Of course, dudes that throw 100, 102 miles an hour, that's
Yeah.
sexy. But
Yeah,
like,
for
what's
sure.
what's everything else that kind of goes into it when you're evaluating a pitcher?
Yeah, so and my preference is still to look for starting pitching. I think that like if you're just thinking about trying to put together a major league team, I mean that is the hardest thing to find. It's the most expensive thing to find. So and then part of it is keeping them healthy, which is really difficult in today's game. I think a lot of kids are training just for velocity and breaking balls and spin rates and all that stuff. And a lot of these kids are a lot bigger and more physical than they were certainly when I was playing 20 years ago, or even when I first started scouting 16 years ago. I mean, it's just changed a lot. These kids are, you go watch high school kids that are 6'4", 220 pounds and just like sculpted out there, and it's you know but their body breaks down a little bit too, because they are so physical and they start throwing hard at a really young age. So for me, it's still hoping there's a little bit of projection left. I still think being an athlete is important for pitchers. Some people have kind of wavered on that a little bit in recent years, but I still prefer a loose athletic guy, because to me that tells you there's more in the tank. There's more down the road. Like you said, the stuff you can see immediately. I mean, you don't even have to be a scout. I can hand my next door neighbor a radar gun and send him to the game, and they can tell me how hard he's throwing. So, that part of it is important, but we get all that information. Like Joe talked about with TrackMan and Hawkeye and all that stuff. I mean, you can get those numbers from anybody around the country. I mean, there's a platform called Synergy where I can sit and watch every single start, every single pitch that a guy threw in college this year in, a short amount of time if I want to. So, you can get the velos and the spin rates and all that stuff. But for me, it's still, maybe trying to figure out, is there something in that delivery and his mechanics that, hey, if our guys can make this little change, this is going to unlock another few miles an hour. It's going to help him get to his breaking ball a little bit better. Or, maybe he doesn't throw a changeup much, but you go watch him in the bullpen and he actually has a pretty good changeup. I mean, it's funny. I told you I went to that 18U trials last week. So there was a lefty there who's 6'4", 210 pounds, good delivery, every pitcher threw twice there. So he throws the first time, and he was good. He was 90, 94, had a good curveball, didn't throw a changeup. So he comes back out, and I had just happened to that morning, I was talking to one of the guys who's on the committee to select the team. And he's like, I just don't know. We really prefer to have a left-handed starter. Like, we got to kind of figure out who that guy is going to be. Well, this guy comes out later that afternoon, and the fastball and curveball are the same. All of a sudden, he's throwing this changeup that's nasty. So I text the guy, and I'm like, well, here's your left-handed starter. And he goes, dude, we had to beg this guy because our report said that he actually had a pretty good changeup. We had to beg him this morning to show us his changeup.
Oh,
Are you shitting me? This guy's got a
my
great changeup. Like, he never uses it. And that's the thing. Like, I think, in high school, obviously, most of these guys are dominating the hitters they're facing with fastball, breaking ball. So they don't use the changeup a lot. And then you get into summer ball, it's a lot of short outings. It's a lot of 2-3 inning deals where you're really going through a lineup one time. So you're really not having to pitch with a third pitch a lot for some of these guys that have great stuff. But that's something that's huge. I mean, you could go watch a guy, and that's why you do that kind of stuff. I mean, you could go watch him next year during the spring in high school, and he may not throw changeups much. And then you can say, well, hey, I saw, they talked him into throwing it at Team USA, and it was really good. So now you got a guy who you're trying to figure out, hey, can this guy be a starter? I mean, I think he can. He's got a good body. He's pretty athletic, but he's only got 2 pitches. But now, okay, he's got 3 pitches. We can kind of, maybe have something to work with. So just that kind of stuff. I mean, again, it's just working, being at games, talking to people, trying to figure out what's going on behind the scenes and stuff like that. And still, trying to project on guys. I mean, that's kind of what our whole job is. You're trying to project 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And that's why it's hard. I mean, we're wrong more often than we're right, for sure. Just like, we talked about hitters that hit 300 are great, and they fail 7 out of 10 times. So it's a difficult thing. It's not, it's not like football or basketball where you draft somebody and they're on TV, a few months later. This is ideally, like some of those dudes this year, they made it to the big leagues a year later, or some of those guys like Skeens and Langford, even earlier than that. But it takes time, a lot of time. So you're trying to figure out what's going to allow these guys to get through those minor league levels and then be good in the big leagues when they get there. So
yeah, I just wanted to add too on the pitching. That's something that I see a lot now, and even in college, like some coaches are just telling these guys like, just dominate these 2 pitches, and then scouts don't know what else they have, and I think that's really hurting guys. I think guys should have 3 or 4, and just work on them, because if you go up to the big leagues and you just have 2 pitches and you're 90 to 94 and you have a fastball and a slider, you're going to get crushed, like they're trying to teach this mentality of like, oh, you only need 2 pitches because the big leaguers do it. Okay, but that guy throws like 98 to 100.
yeah.
With a slider that's 91 and 92, so it's completely different. And I think that's kind of the shift that Marc was talking about too with the training. You're training to master these 2 pitches, but you don't have a changeup. You don't have anything else besides a fastball and a slider. And I think that's really hurting guys. I think you should be able to command, 3 or 4 pitches, because that's what's going to help you in the long run. Because you get to the big leagues and, like I said, if you only have 2 pitches and you're 90, 94, Good luck.
Yeah.
Makes
And it's
sense.
like a few times we're in the draft this year talking about pitchers, and you see the amount of starts that guys made, but then the innings pitched doesn't quite match up. And our analytics guy will say, like, hey, why is this guy? He's got like 15 starts, but it's like 4 1/3 innings a start. Like, is he healthy? This and that. But it's a lot of times it's just because the pitch count is run up. They're still throwing 90, 100 pitches, but these guys just aren't getting as deep in the game as they used to. I mean, and I think a lot of it is, just training for swing and miss. I mean, obviously, any pitching coach prefers that. I mean, we all know if you don't put the ball in play, you have a less, it's harder to get base hits, obviously.
Yeah.
But I do still think to become a complete pitcher and looking down the road, long term, I still feel like you need to definitely have more than 2 pitches because the hitters aren't going to get worse. They're only going to get better.
Yeah.
So you got to be able to mix up your timing and show some different stuff. And, a lot of the hitters are seeing, you know, that kind of velocity on a daily basis now. So, it was funny. In one of those meetings, I don't want to keep going on and on, but
I know.
one of those meetings at the combine, we were talking to a position player who had faced one of the first pitchers that went off the board this year. But he was talking about it. He was a mid to upper 90s guy. And he said, well, after a few innings in the game that we played him, his velocity went down. He was throwing like 92, 94. We see that every day. So it was no big deal. That, like 10, 12, 15 years ago, if you were 90, 94, you stood out.
Your
It
dude.
was a different game. Now, you got this guy saying, hey, he's 90, 94. That was nothing. So it's just kind of interesting but that again goes back to the point. If you have a change up or something to soften the ball a little bit and mess with the hitter's timing, I think it's important. But
Awesome.
yeah,
Man, I love that.
yeah.
Appreciate you guys letting me run you through the gauntlet of questions, kind of opening up about your unique points of view, how you guys see stuff, obviously from the scouting side and from the agent side of things, and just kind of, man, educating the audience, man. I appreciate everybody tuning in. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for the questions. Marc SAUER, the cross checker for the Oakland A's, Joseph GUZMAN, Empowerment Sports Group. Check these guys out. I appreciate your guys' time, man. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it, and we will catch you guys again soon. Thank you, fellas.
Thanks, Ian.